So we are going to have a fantastic conversation about performance, true HR leadership, and of course, human-centric technology and using human-centric technology to drive organizational change. My name's Ali Khan, and I'll be your host for the next 30 minutes. Before we kick off, I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of country and their ongoing connection to the land, sea, and communities that we are so privileged to work from today. I'm personally Zooming to you today from the Kulin Nation, so the lands of the Wurundjeri people. So let me officially introduce you to Vanessa Goryl. So she is a Master of Human Resources and Industrial Relations. She's got about 15 years experience as an HR practitioner and is the current outcomes lead here at AbilityMap. So Vanessa, I will let Vanessa introduce herself in more detail in a little bit, but she spent over 15 years understanding people and workplace change and driving workplace change formally with customers at Qantas, New South Wales Government, and Cornerstone. So, hi, Vanessa, and thanks so much for sharing your insights with us today. And we're all very much looking forward to your thoughts on the webinar.
Oh, thank you, Ali. Thank you so much for having me. And I'd also like to pay my respects to the traditional custodians of the land from which I join you today. That's the Darug and Guringai peoples, their elders past, present, and emerging. And thank you for the opportunity today. Really excited.
So tell us, what was your journey? How did you come to join AbilityMap as the outcomes lead?
That's a great question. Having looked back over my career, I couldn't exactly call it a linear career path. I think it's a little bit more of a scatter plot. But when I set out after completing my HR degree, I wanted to become an HR consultant. So I sought opportunities that were across a range of HR functions and a range of industries. And that's what led me to work in things like workforce planning, recruitment, Rem and Ben, performance management. I've worked in HR tech and business analysis. And I've worked in so many different industries, in the public sector, the private sector. I worked in manufacturing. I've worked with planes and trains and loved it. The only one I haven't done is automobiles. That might be somewhere in my future. And ultimately, it led me to become an HR consultant, which I did for the last 5 years. And I'd met our CEO, Mike Erlin, while I was working at the New South Wales public sector, and we had just launched the New South Wales Capability Framework. And he told me about this capability assessment tool that was being developed. And at that time, the New South Wales framework was used for all of the role descriptions. It was being used in recruitment processes. But at that stage, there was no assessment available. And through all my years, I've worked with lots of skills assessments and personality and psychometric assessments. I've had them all done to me too. And I've been familiar with the New South Wales Capability Framework. And mostly through my consulting years, I've seen so many organizations really struggle with assessing and capturing skills required for work. So I could see this gap in capability assessment, and I knew I needed to be part of it. And here I am.
Fantastic. And so is that what led to this research piece then? It's that gap in that capability assessment and then applying that to the HR business partners. You can tell us a little bit more around, I guess, what was that specific gap in knowledge that led to this HR business partner in the future research, and what does it feel?
Yeah, sure. So the gap that we've been finding over years is it's really easy to say what the functional requirements of a role are, what kind of qualifications people need to have. Do they need a degree? Do they need a diploma? Do they need a trade certificate, and all of those sorts of things? But the piece that for us in HR for a long time that's been missing is around those human capabilities. So that's really the gap we were trying to fill with this research. So we now know which capabilities will take HR forward into next year and beyond. So I guess the thrust of it all was, the last 2 years has really shown everyone how critical HR is. And this research brought together views from a number of HR professionals, and they work across a range of different industries. And the main thing we wanted to tap into was to define those capabilities the HRBPs are going to need in the future. So our HRBP of the future role profile sets out those 8 capabilities, and that's all included in the research paper, which I suspect a few people on the call today have read. And this information can now be used to inform future HR recruitment, but also for professional growth opportunities for existing HR teams. And those capabilities were really the gap we were trying to fill.
Unreal. And so really in that paper, there was, I guess, from that research, and as you say, most people on the call will have had the chance to read that research report and know that there are really those 3 key insights around those capabilities being true business partner, human-centric leader, and change champion. So we'll dive into each of those in the coming questions and really tease out what those mean in practical terms. I wanted to get started with true business partner and dive into that in a little bit more detail. I know that, so obviously we had a breakfast roundtable on the back of this research, and there was a really, really interesting discussion around the HR leader seated at the executive table. So in the context of that true business partner, what does this research reveal, and what practical advice can you share?
Yep. Well, the breakfast roundtable sure did raise some very interesting questions, and it was definitely reinforcing the outcomes of our research. So one of the big things that came out of the roundtable was how critical the role of the HRBP became to businesses during COVID. Everybody needed their HRBPs at that time to help. There were so many things going on at the time, and HR was central to everyone getting through it. One of the challenges that was called out, though, at the breakfast was that the commerciality of HR is actually not really well understood by those outside of HR. We get it, but we're not sure those outside of HR understand it. So it is interesting that the business acumen was called out as a key capability of the HRBP of the future. And I think this represents a great opportunity for HR to capitalize on now that we're critically at that table. So business acumen, that's one of the capabilities in the profile. It's about making commercially savvy decisions. It's about being an astute business leader. And that means knowing what's going on around you, not just what's going on within your team or for your employees, but what's really going on around you. And also capitalizing on commercial opportunities. So in practical terms, what we're finding is that there seems to be this language gap between HR and other business functions that needs to be bridged. And I use that term bridge deliberately because on the one side, the onus is on HR to speak the language of their fellow business partners in finance and technology and other executive functions. But there's actually also an opportunity to educate those partners as well on our language. Everyone has their own jargon. HR is no different. And the jargon can even change depending on which organization you're in or which environment or division or department even within an organization. So there's definitely 2 sides to this communication piece.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have an example of that? Like, where you've seen, I guess, that bridge that you talk about. Do you have an example of how that might play out?
Yeah, the one that really comes to mind, and I guess in the context at the moment of what everybody's going through, it almost feels like post-COVID, but it's not. Someone in my household just came down with it today. But the example that I have is around attrition, because everybody talks about that one and most people understand what it means. And many of us can quantify it in dollar terms, in, you know, the cost of replacing employees. We can demonstrate that high attrition is bad for business, right?
Mm-hmm.
But this alone doesn't make it a business problem. It's still viewed as something that HR needs to manage. It's something for them to figure out. So
Yeah, okay.
we need, I think, to take that guesswork out and build that bridge.
Okay.
And there's a few ways that you can do it. I know this is some of the stuff that I used to do in leading my team when I was in consulting, is around understanding revenue forecasts. So it could now be, well, what's the impact to our revenue forecast if our sales targets can't be met due to sustained high attrition in our sales team?
Mm-hmm.
What if we've got a critical product that's about to be released, but we can't release it into the market when we've announced we're going to? What's the impact on earnings per share because we've got high attrition in that area and we can't get that product out to market?
Mm-hmm.
Thinking again with my background, earnings per share doesn't mean anything in a public sector environment. They don't operate in those kinds of ways, but they do operate to fixed budgets. So if you have high attrition and it's increasing our reliance on things like casuals, contractors, agency staff, and you're plugging nursing or teacher shortages, which department's budget's going to be impacted to cover those costs? So it's really about connecting the impact of the problems that HR are tasked with managing to the impact on the other functions of the business and conveying it in their language. And this is what our commercially conscious HRBPs are doing. And I think they need to do it to make their voice heard in their environment.
Yeah, absolutely. That attrition example really does highlight just how important it is to then, you know, have that business acumen and actually take that to the table, to the executives. So unreal. So
yeah,
then we've got the second.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to, no, please, you go.
It just popped into my brain. I was thinking that, you know, without people, there's no profits. Without people, there's no services. We all need people in the organization. It's so critical. It's just about getting that message heard.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And, you know, they are the pivotal asset in our businesses. And so it is so important. Assets. Yeah. I don't need to say anymore. You've added enough color to that. So, you know, talking about it being people-centric, let's turn then to human-centric leader, which is the second insight that really came through the research. As a business partner, what does that mean in practical terms?
Yeah. So the human-centric leader, they're an empathetic leader. They're adaptive and they're authentic. And a really key capability to all of this is the ability to listen to others. So as an HRBP, of course, this means listening to and caring about your employees. And we've certainly seen the rise of employee experience, people, and culture as a focus for many organizations over the past 5 years and more. But it's not just about the employees. It also means really listening to other business partners, understanding things like their pain points. What are their teams or business goals? What are their commitments to shareholders? Certainly in many of my roles in HR, I wouldn't know what the impact is to shareholders, but bridge that gap, go and understand. Understanding how the challenges you're managing, like attrition or talent shortages, manifest in their areas of the business. You know, does it increase sick leave? Does it increase overtime? Does that introduce additional cost? Does it have no impact? Are they actually over-resourced, which would be a luxury? What are the impacts for their businesses? And learning the language of your colleagues in finance, IT, etc., to build that bridge. So the human-centric leader is bringing both the people and the business perspectives into the HR strategy.
Mhm.
And it requires the characteristics of that human-centric leader to really listen to and understand what's affecting different business functions as well as the people. And I suppose you could say it's having people empathy and business empathy.
Yeah, I like that. People empathy and business empathy. So there's obviously there's a lot of change as well in terms of moving to that point, which leads us into the third insight that came through the report, which is the change champion. And that probably doesn't necessarily mean what it might on the outset. So can you please expand on that for us?
Yeah, sure. So everybody knows things are changing rapidly. That's no surprise. It's sort of part of everything that everybody does. And as we're seeing the baby boomer generation retire from the workforce, we're seeing rapid changes in the workplace. We're seeing talented workforce shortages like we've never seen before. And the change we've been experiencing seems to have accelerated in those last 2 years with reductions in things like skilled migration options as well. Our research called out the need for the HRBPs to be change champions, which means being proactive and positive in leading others through change. It doesn't mean being responsible for the change, but it is that you're proactive and positive when it's around you, when it's happening. And so, for example, if you're leading talent acquisition and you in the past, this is how we always used to do it. You go and advertise and you get a lovely long list and you get to shortlist. You can invite 5 people to come and interview, and then you have the luxury of choice. You might have 3 or 4 amazing candidates to choose from. What we're hearing now is they're not even getting 5 candidates to apply for a role. So HR really needs to move to very quickly doing things very differently, which is a big change. So we've heard organisations who are needing to access non-traditional talent pools. We've had organisations focusing on internal mobility and playing to people's strengths, moving people into different roles, that functions they may never have thought of, but if they have a look at what their capability strengths are, where can they play best? And redesigning jobs, cutting them down, tapping into part-time workers, all sorts of things, upskilling, reskilling, cross-skilling, cross-functional teams, it's all going on. That's a lot of change. That's a lot of change. And it's a change in the process of how things are done. It's a change for your employees. Poor things are having this done to them. There's change for your HR team to adapt to these new ways of working, new ways of sourcing candidates. Your managers, they're having to do things differently too. The onboarding experience for somebody coming across from a different function is very different from people coming in from outside. And also those people, these people who can quickly adapt are at an advantage over others. And that's why that HRBP change champion piece is so important.
Absolutely. I think we all feel it acutely, and we do look to HRBPs to help us through and navigate a lot of that, particularly where you've got that experience. And as you say, those capabilities are just so critical moving forward as it happens faster and faster.
Yeah.
So, so then, we've gone through those 3 key insights, and we've defined, that HRBP of the future and what it looks like. Where to from here?
Oh, that's a great question. There's just so much more to explore.
We do actually have a couple of questions that I can see coming through. I'll read them out if you're okay to field them. So
Sure.
The first one is, do we know what other execs at the table think the HRBP should possess versus what HRBPs think we should possess?
Oh, that's a fabulous question. That is fabulous. That, to be honest, no. not in a structured, formal viewpoint. What we have heard from the breakfast roundtable is that there are differing views. So one of the next steps we want to take with this research is actually going out to different stakeholders that interact with HR to really understand what they need. I know I've been working with an organisation that's actually done that as part of their finance leadership piece. They've not only talked within their finance team, well, what do we need from ourselves, but also gone out to their direct stakeholders to find out what they want from them. So this is, definitely our next step for the research. Great question.
So like a phase two.
Yeah, phase 2. Yep.
If we wanted to do this in our own company environment, can we?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Okay. So the survey that we invited the HR professionals to participate in is all built in as part of our software tool. And it takes about 10 minutes per person to go through all of our capabilities and decide which ones are critical for the business. And there's a few different ways we could, if there's one person who's the expert and they know everything, then we rely on their input. There's other ways where we go out to a broad group of people and get lots of views and consolidate those together. And it's all automated in the platform. It does it nice and quickly for everybody. And there's another way we can look at it if we actually have a group of people who are really championing the values of the business, they're the high performers in these particular roles. We can actually ask them to go and do the assessment and take a look at their consolidated results and see what capabilities they share that makes them amazing. So there's a few different ways, and yes, absolutely. And the best way to do that, reach out to me, say hi, and we'll set you up to give it a go in your organization.
Yeah, fantastic. I can imagine that's incredibly valuable because, as we know, the environment shapes everything, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And I worked in HR in Railcorp, which is all trains and heavy machinery. And I worked in Qantas, which is also lots of heavy machinery, but planes, it's just trains in the sky. And that they're so different. They have so many of the same types of people who work there, but one was founded by the military and it's a public sector organization. That's a very different culture and structure of an organization and challenges they face compared with a household brand like Qantas is so steeped in Australian history and tradition and so on and so forth. So HR in those two environments completely different.
Yeah, and it's so easy to assume that they would be the same from the outset. So fantastic. Well, I'm just looking at the time. That probably feels like a great point to end the webinar. We know that there's so much more research that we haven't covered on the call today. Vanessa, thank you so much for being so open and really just sharing so much of that experience and going into so much detail with all of us today. I think, I have no doubt that there's just so many takeaways that people can kind of just look at their own and reflect on. So thank you so much. Also, to everyone who attended the session for taking the time to read the report and actually attend it. It was just fantastic to have you here. So thank you again, everyone. Thank you, Vanessa. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the day.